Good afternoon, everyone. It is now just gone 1 o'clock. So welcome to Strategy and Resources Policy Committee for the 14th of July 2025. Just to note, as we work through the meeting, the Policy Committee team will display the agenda reports on the screens in the Council chamber, purely for the benefit of those of you in the public gallery. So if you want it moved at all, Suzanne, let us know. So agenda item 1 is welcome, introductions and safety information. First of all, I would like to welcome members of the committee to the meeting. Just also say that the meeting is being webcast, and also I'll just quickly outline the emergency evacuation procedure. We're not expecting any fire alarm drills, so in the event of the alarm sounding, please leave the room calmly via the lobby area and through the main front door of City Hall. Turn right, walk down the ramp towards the cathedral. The assembly point is in front of the cathedral. Agenda item number 2 is apologies for absence and substitutions. Ian, I understand Councillor Heather-Mack has sent apologies and Councillor Substitutions Sabalala is substituting. Thank you. We also, I don't believe we have any other apologies. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Can I ask committee members if there are any interest to declare in relation to the items of business on the agenda? Any interest declared will be recorded in minutes. Are there any interest to declare? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Please note there is a slight error to be corrected. At the top of page 11 of the agenda pack, there is a reference to East Bristol livable neighbourhood, listed read South Bristol livable neighbourhood. With that one change, I would like to move the minutes of the meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee held on 16th of June as a correct record. Can I ask for a seconder, please? Seconded. Thank you. Can I ask if the committee are content to confirm a message as a correct record subject to that correction? Please show of hands all those in favour. Thank you. Okay, we move on to agenda item 5. Before I do so, can I just check for declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Agenda item 5 is Chair's announcements. The only announcement I have today is not really an announcement as such, it's more to do with the fact that I have to leave at 3 p.m. Nick Hibbard also needs to leave, and he will be replaced by Andy Wathery, and then we both have to leave at 3 p.m. When I leave, Councillor Sarah Classett, as Vice Chair, will take over the chairing of the meeting. My apologies that we may be finished by that time, but I just wanted to warn you in advance. Tom?
I wasn't sure when to bring this up, so this may or may not be the appropriate time, but it was about an item that came up in the last meeting, which was the acquisition of the Turner painting, and I believe that was unsuccessful. But I think we ought to, congratulate the team for doing their best on that, and, good effort is all I can say.
Thank you, Tom, and very well reminded, I think. Just to reinforce what you said, it was something that was put together very quickly. We did reach our target. I should say we also received commitments from elsewhere as well, so our eventual offer was actually considerably higher than what might have been assumed from the crowdfunder. Unfortunately, it was not 1.79 million, which is what the amount actually put forward. I think it is a shame that it appears that that painting will not be on public display. I think it's something a lot of people with interest in the arts would have loved to have been able to see on display and see it in the city. But you're absolutely right, Tom. It was a very good effort, put together at very short notice, And I would like to add thanks to all those you did come forward and put forward donations, all of which I believe is now been returned. Okay, we move on now to agenda item number 6, which is public forum. We have 2 public questions for this meeting. The first is from Dr. Suzanne Audrey about the South Bristol Liveable Neighbourhood Public Engagement Report. Suzanne, do you have a follow-up question?
Is the micro? Oh, it is working. Because I want to shock you, Tony, and say, no, I don't. And I want to say thank you very much. The report is, yes, it's available now. So thanks, and thanks to the team as well, everyone that managed to get that out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. And I'm glad that we were able to give you the answer you wanted this time. There was a second public forum question from Mr. Dan Aykroyd, but Dan isn't here. But he would have received written responses to his questions. There are no public statements for today's meeting, so we'll move immediately on to the first substantive agenda item, which is agenda item number 7, which is the period 2 25-26 finance outturn report. I'd like to advise the committee that this report presents information and analysis on the council's financial performance against the approved budget and its forecast use of resources for the financial year 2025-2026 and seeks approval of 3 specific financial decisions. And I would like to invite Andy Rothery, the Director for Finance, to outline the report. Andy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll just walk through the headlines of the papers. So I think the first thing to note is the Council's 25-26 revenue budget's 571 million. What period 2 is forecasting is a 9.6 million overspend against that budget. So that's mainly made up across adverse variances in children education. That's made up of residential placement overspends, homeschool transport pressures and education psychologists. There's also pressures in adult social care of 3.4 million, and that is high demand and cost in residential care placements and longer length of stays than what has been modelled previously. And also there's 4.3 million across the council's property portfolio. So this does range from energy costs to facilities management and to holding costs for the assets. These are being addressed in the longer term through the corporate landlord project, but at the moment there is a forecast overspend. I think one thing to note for context, that's about 1.7% of the total budget. And at this stage of the year, the numbers may change because it is a very early forecast. But the good thing to note is pressures have been identified early. As part of the new budget management framework, there's a requirement for officers now to work up mitigation plans. So they will be looking at ways to control costs and hopefully mitigate this down in terms of the forecast overspend. There have been further risks identified of 10.9 million, but to note these are risks at this stage. They're not quantified and built into the forecast. So on the housing revenue account, we have a small variance under 1% of 1.3 million. In the main, this is down to repairs and maintenance costs and damp and mould, addressing damp and mould in buildings. On the DSG, the Dedicated Schools Grant, there is a forecast of 37.2 million. This is the gross forecast on the DSG, and this is related to the SEND management and the safety valve programme. So this is broadly in line with what's in the safety valve plan. It's a little bit over, but there's a council contribution that will take that down. But it is in line with what the spend trajectory has been showing. Public health forecast to be on budget, Harbour Authority on budget, and on the capital programme there is slippage against the programme around 41.1 million. That's against the total programme of 432 million. Okay, that's it from me, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments. Councillor Gillandris.
Thank you very much, Tony. A comment and then a question, if I may, Andy. I mean, my comment obviously is £10 million adrift so early on is not good news at all. It may be a small percentage, but it's a big number to me, £10 million. It may not be to other people, but it certainly is to me. So that's really unfortunate. The question is this. Do you feel or do you think that by the end of the year we will eliminate that £10 million, so we'll be back in balance? Or at the very worst, do you think this is the maximum of our overspend?
Because we're at period 2, it's hard to answer with 100% confidence because what we do in terms of running council services, you have volatile services that demand can go up, it can be unpredictable, and costs can go up, but it also can go down as well. So what I'm confident is that through the budget management framework we've got in place, we're taking all the steps necessary now to come up with mitigation plans to quantify how alternative options that sit within delegation can be put into place to control those costs. So hopefully it will be a journey of cost containment and cost reduction that will bring us back into balance.
Councillor Reynard.
So it's not long since we went through a budget setting process. Might feel like a long time ago for some. And already we're looking at £20.5 million of pressure. I know you're saying the 10.9 is risks at this stage. So I suppose my first question is, how likely do you think that is going to materialise? That 10.9, do you think that is something that will end up going into the pressure?
I'd hope that gets worked down. It's probably the bit of uncertainty is some of that risk is in adult social care, and that is, as I touched on earlier, in terms of demand for residential placements and nursing, it can go up. But I am confident the team are doing everything they can in terms of looking at how they can stretch the pound further, but also definitely negotiate better cost placements and promote independence, and that will control cost and meet our statutory requirements in terms of providing care.
Okay. Hope it comes down is a bit concerning as a turn of phrase, and you'd imagine doesn't give me much confidence that that projection will reduce. And I think I just reflect on something I raised at Children and Young People's Committee as well in relation to children's services and out of area placements, where we're spending circa 34 million on about 93 children who obviously need quite complex care in some cases. We've got two children's homes are going to sit empty for 11 months. That's obviously not an acceptable situation when we've got growing costs, and is actually going to be taken to try and reduce the amount of time they're going to sit empty.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd expect the executive director and their services to be putting in all steps they can to ensure that we're making best use of all of our provision, whether that's contracted provision or provision that we own and run ourselves.
So just one more question on revenue now, just a quick question on the capital. And I suppose this one is relevant to both. How is it we're already this far out on projections for both revenue and capital this early on in the year? Was the budget that passed the wrong budget?
I'm confident the budget was the correct budget to take through full council in terms of my assessment of the budget. All areas were rebased in line with current demand and activity during 24-25. I think it's right at this stage to identify risks and report them, because then that enables the culture change and practice change needed across our services to manage financial risks. So I'm comfortable with the position at the moment.
Thank you. And I think just a reflection before moving on to the capital question is, I think what I'm also worried about is last year we were able to balance the budget. That was because we had that one-off 14.9 million, didn't we, from the business rates pooling reserve, which won't necessarily be available to us this year. So I think I'm just flagging that. But on the capital programme, how have we got 41 million quid worth of slippage already? I'm obviously aware our spending has, on capital has increased year on year for a number of years, which is obviously really good to see. But, our team's just being too ambitious, in what they're saying from a profiling perspective.
I'd say there's a journey of programme managers of capital schemes becoming more accurate in terms of their forecasting. It's a £432 million gross capital budget for 1 year. So there will be schemes that have maybe assumed spending from the 1st of April and actually going through the approval process and then going on to contracting. You end up with 3 or 4 months. That can quickly get to the £40 million if you think about just a couple of months delay on a couple of schemes.
Yeah, I just think it's something we need to continue to look at and just make sure that we are thinking about realistic, because what it does is it makes us take other decisions in the budgets, whether that's the amount of property we need to sell off in order to meet the capital programme or to meet flexible use of capital receipts, or in the case of the HRA schemes we might take out of the housing revenue account and give to registered providers instead. So it is really important that we're getting that a bit more accurate, because I think it just then leads us to take decisions that perhaps we wouldn't want to take, or take a different view on if we knew that headroom was actually there in reality. Yeah,
one thing I'd say, because this did come up in the finance subcommittee conversations around starting to think about the budget for next year, we are really encouraging people to get their profile as accurate as possible. I'd say with capital, it's not if something slips right, it's not a recurrent saving, it's a temporary cash saving because you don't need to take out the borrowing now, but you still will need to take out that borrowing in, say, 6 months' time. So what it does create is a one-off balance, on interest, but it isn't recurrent, so it wouldn't impact the revenue budget.
Thank you.
Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andy, and all the officers who've worked on these reports. Fantastic level of detail. I was wondering, you were mentioning, and it's in here as well, the amount of over-demand in our demand-led services, which is causing a lot of the budget slippage so far. I was wondering if you could drill into maybe what you think is most concerning of the areas with overspend which aren't in the statutory demand-led services, please. So apart from adult social care and children's, what's the issue that keeps sort of keeping you awake at night at the moment?
There's definitely lots of issues that keep me awake at night, but in terms of our budget, I'd say the one where we need to focus our work, and it is linked to the key variances, is the property cost. We've got a large estate, so holding a large estate means that we're going to have a maintenance cost of that estate, so it costs a lot to maintain, but then it's also, that's in terms of the actual asset, the core building fabric, but then also the facilities cost as well, so trying to really review and be as effective as possible in terms of using our operational estate and commercial estate is the area that I'd like us to look at in more detail.
Thank you. That's somewhat reassuring, to be honest, because we've got the property transformation programme, so we're sort of killing two birds with one stone there, if you like, or solving two problems at once, if you like, by removing assets which are expensive to maintain and using the capital for better things. Thank you.
Councillor Blenkinsop.
Thank you. We've already touched on the early years situation and the children's care. But I do have a couple of questions on that nonetheless. So just looking at page 40 with the table 7, obviously a lot of that is in the high needs block. Is that still out of area children's placements that's causing the bulk of that cost, or is there something else that's also serving as have that high of a forecast?
My understanding is there is a high level of out-of-area placements. I'll be able to get the exact detail from Hannah Woodhouse, our Executive Director, if that's okay, but that's my understanding.
That's absolutely fine, but that exact detail would be useful, because I think to solve the problem, we need to understand it. On that point around forecasting and how we've been better at that, again, while the forecast variance isn't that high, the exception there is, again, children's and education, where we've got an 18% variance. Given that you said that we are getting better at these kinds of forecasts and understanding what's going to be coming up, why is the variance that high?
I think it really is the nature of the market. Things are sustaining at a high cost. So if we think about the level of inflation nationally, it is flowing through into basically the provider market. So whilst the activity variance that we've modelled may be going down a little bit, and I think they are in terms of placements, the costs are sustaining at the same level, and then with inflation, annual inflation going in, they are higher than I think originally anticipated. If you look back on, say, 12 months ago, we thought inflation was going to be much lower than it is now, so that is sustaining a high cost base for the council.
Please do correct me on this point, but I admit that the inflation on different things is obviously very different. But, for example, on housing and the HRA, that's 7%, 8%, where there is obviously a variance and that inflation has an impact. But I'm struggled to seeing how inflation alone accounts for the 18% on... it doesn't count for that alone, I'm sure, but that seems much higher than inflation alone would allow for, even allowing a lot of that maybe in expenses that are going up higher than the cost of building supplies. So it really is just...
Is your question specific to the HRA operating costs?
No, it's specific to again, if we've got that problem of inflation, which I recognise we do have as a problem, and that's leading to variance in other areas like housing, I presume, or in growth and regeneration, as materials will also be subject to inflation, there may be other costs. Why is inflation such a problem for the children's and education one, accepting that there will be a slightly higher inflation?
Yeah, because if someone presents and they are entitled to care, we provide the care after the assessment. So whilst some of those other areas you touch on, there may be more levers to actually slow down some of the actual cost coming through, but on really statutory services, it's care being provided at that point of need.
Right, thank you. One last one, which is a smaller question, just on page 43, we've got the contingent liabilities, such as the prospect of litigation. I note that these proceedings still haven't commenced and no claims have been received. Are we anticipating much movement on either of these liabilities in the near future? Do we think they are substantial risks?
In terms of the 24-25 budget, we're going through the audit process at the moment. We're not incorporating any new contingent liabilities.
Thank you.
Councillor Sabalala.
Is it on? There we go. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Andy, for this. Yeah, it's really great to see the balancing of accounts from the harbour and public health. That seems to be quite a good positive. My question was more in line in terms of, the delays on capital projects have an inverse impact on investor save and capital receipts. How are we going to make sure that we can really manage that effectively? Understanding to what our colleagues have been asking there, some of these things are beyond our control, market demand or market saturation in terms of lack of other providers, delays on projects, especially large projects like we're seeing in the HRA, has got an additional impact. But what can we control and what can't we control?
We've got to be really strict on ourselves in terms of what we prioritise, because we're a large council and we have a number of projects, and some of them will be ones that are critical to our financial success because they are investor save projects. It's making sure we've got the leadership and the project management capacity to move those forwards. I'd say that on the point on capital receipts, which is a really good one, because they are we have assets that we have committed to dispose of to help finance the council. It's having a good and really well-tested framework in place. So when we are looking to dispose of assets, we put it through an asset appraisal assessment process. So we know that that receipt is the right thing to do in terms of disposing it. The better we get at that, you'll see an increase in throughput because we have an adopted methodology. That's something that's been tested and has full support through the committee system. Yeah. Then we should be able to we'll create more momentum basically in terms of then disposing of assets because we have put them through that appraisal.
Thank you. Councillor King.
I'd like to echo the sentiments there about the public health budget. I think that they've managed to operate within their means for year on year now for quite some time is a real testament to the officers leading that department, as well as the incredible work that they do, but they know how to operate within their means. My question's regarding the budget pressure in growth and regen, specifically referring to the sustainability team. And I appreciate that budget pressure is difficult, and I know it's going to be difficult to balance. I know there's other very political areas coming out of that budget as well that are going to be challenging. However, the Labour administration had budgeted for that department year on year until 28-29 at a reduced cost. But I want to ask, what is the approach to that under the Greens? Will the budget be reinstalled to the previous levels in order to reflect I think the public's perception that the Greens run on a ticket to spearhead environmental improvements? So I'd like to ask, will that budget be protected and improved and brought back to its original levels? Thanks. I think it's a question probably for you, Tony, to be honest.
Thank you. Yes, that is the ambition. I think what we want to do is, wherever possible, ensure that we were able to provide a budget that meets a wide range of needs. But obviously, as a Green administration, I'm conscious very much of the fact that environment and sustainability has to be near or at the very top of that. So it's about getting a balance right, because obviously we have high levels of demand for special education needs. We have high level of demands for social care, and we need to make sure that the people who need those services get those services. So that's also a priority. But if we don't do that by also tackling our environmental and sustainability objectives, we'll be undermining, because what we'll be doing, we'll be delivering something that isn't sustainable. Because if we build loads of houses, whatever we use those houses for, including whether we use them for children's homes or for additional special supported housing, if we don't deliver those homes in a way that are also environmentally sustainable, then all we're doing is building up a problem later. So yes, I'm committed to getting that budget to where we need it to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the response. I am aware that the 1.5 budget for this year is going down to 900k in 26-27, so it just feels like a very urgent, pressing need as we're going into the budget season. It would be great to see that priority coming forward. Thank you.
Councillor Sabalala.
Just a thought. I guess maybe this touches on finance, but because of all the budget progress reports you've kind of added here from all the different committees, and one thing that consistently is an issue is market. So this demanded market means that if we did look at the market and think about how we reshape the market, that could actually reduce us having to focus on only a few suppliers, because the market maybe is not as diverse enough. It's not as broad enough that we have opportunities to buy from other providers. Are we consistently holding on a few, especially for large projects? That means if those few are having delays, then we end up with the financial burden on top of that. So my question to you on the finance side is, how do you see the importance of us diversifying the market, making it a bit more broader, so we have a wider option to choose from, than rather having a few to choose from that actually, if they're not delivering, it has an overall impact from one thing to the next? Thanks.
So this is a really good procurement question. For me, the way I see it is actually how we engage and talk to the market. Thursday this week, I'm actually attending a procurement event to talk to the market about the money that we spend locally and nationally. And for me, to actually start changing the market, I think it will involve more collaboration. We have frameworks in place, that councils will access across the country. They do help, but I think actually combining some of our spending power locally will help us shape the market. But to do that, it will take time. I think it will take a lot of thinking to explain to the market how we would like to see the market change as well, because it's, there's buyers and sellers, and it's a transaction, and it's how we get beyond being transactional and start building more partnerships. But to do that, we've got to be obviously compliant through our procurement routes as well. So that is going to take market engagement, and then taking a longer term view through procurement to actually work out what spending power we've got over a time period, and then best engage the market so we can get the best suppliers to meet our needs in Bristol. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'll quickly comment is a couple of things. Going back to your point, Sibs, is I think in many areas of the council, we do want to look at a diversity of different types of supplier. And that's not necessarily in terms of the private sector. There are public sector alternatives as well. So we are looking to partner with other public sector suppliers, not just in this area, but on other areas as well. It's also about making sure that when we look at what properties we got, that if we have opportunities for those properties to be used to provide additional children's homes, but social care, supported housing, temporary accommodation, that we do that. And clearly, in some areas, we need to move quicker. I think it's also about working with our partners in government as well. So that's whether that's central government, but also at the regional level with the West of England Combined Authority, but also working with other local authorities. So one of the big successes recently has been the Future of Council Housing, which was led by Southwark Council, and included about over 100 different councils all working together. And now quite a few things like that organisation that group of councillors asked for are now in the comprehensive spending review. If I was asked to say the one thing that worries me at the moment, I think if you went through this P2 report and compared it to last year, you would see that in most areas there's been improvement. The one area where there hasn't been improvement is the dedicated schools grant. And I think, not just in Bristol, but across the country, I think that is the one area where local authorities across the country, regardless of what party is leading those local authorities, that's the one area where we are looking for a solution. And we've been told that by late autumn, the government will publish a solution which hopefully will allow us to get back onto track so we can both deliver the type of services that those children need and also do that without going bankrupt. Any more comments or questions, Tom?
I think just a brief response to that. I went to the LJ conference, went to the session on SEND, so it was quite interesting to hear about the detail that we'll hopefully see in the autumn, which will be really interesting. I think obviously it's also good that the statutory override in the meantime has been extended for 2 years just to give it a bit of breathing space, and it's going to be interesting to see how the deficits are dealt with and how we get SEND on a more sustainable footing whilst making sure we're meeting the needs of children and young people. I think there's always going to be things that we'll need from national, but it is important we don't ever lose the focus on what we need to do here as the council as well. You know, the children's homes example I gave earlier is but one example, and it's clear that there isn't tight enough management around those things. I talked about putting a member forum question on a property in my ward that's been empty for many years, but the decision on surplus, being a surplus asset, was taken in June 2023. It's still not occupied. We're 2 years on. That was meant to go to adult social care, so it does feel like that needs some real focus, look at how we're going to get those timelines sorted, because otherwise we're going to continue to bleed money because actually, the providers have got, ultimately can set the price that they like, but actually there are some solutions that we can do to stop it getting a lot worse. So I think that can we really kind of make sure we have some focus on that, and I think maybe we need a paper to come here on it to show us what management actions are being taken, because it doesn't feel like it's being gripped at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a wide range of areas across the council where Andy's mentioned about the financial controls, but we are aware we're still on the journey and we still have improvements to make. Councillor McAllister.
Thank you. Just to potentially reassure Councillor Renard, there are some plans which may be in these papers. I think, but I've certainly seen the plans to over double our number of children's homes in the next year, if I'm remembering correctly, or beds rather, if I'm remembering correctly.
We are. The question is not so much opening up the physical properties; it's getting the children safely transferred into those new properties. Okay. Do we have any more questions or comments for Andy? Okay. Well, in that case, and I'm going to take a glass of water because there's a lot of items to be noted on this. Can I ask that the Strategy and Resources Committee notes the following 14 items? This is why I say bear with me. The Council's General Fund forecast outturn revenue overspend of 9.6 million at P2 2025-2026 against the Council approved budget of 571.4 million. 2, the additional weighted net risk of 10.9 million per the Risk and Opportunities Register. 3, the performance on delivery of savings. 4, the Council's outturn position of 1.3 million overspend within the housing revenue account to be transferred to the HRA General Reserve at the year end. 5, the Council's outturn position of a £37.2 million net overspend in the dedicated schools grant, and that, as part of the DFE safety valve agreement, the General Fund approved budget for 25-26 includes the transfer of 11.7 million to an earmarked reserve at year end. 6, the break-even position on public health services. 7, the break-even position on the Bristol Harbour Fund. 8, that recovery action plans will be developed for the areas of budget pressure to include children and education, adult and children's care, growth and regeneration, and the HRA. 9, the latest position on balance sheet risks. 10, the Council's forecast underspend of 41.1 million against the capital programme revised budget 25-26, comprised of 25.9 million underspend on the general fund and 15.2 million underspend on the HOA. 11. The planned use of capital receipts of 20.7 million. 12. The in-year collection levels for council tax and business rates as set out in the reports. 13. The level of aged debt as of 31st of May 2025. And 14. The 1st of April 2025 opening balances on the general fund and earmarked reserves and movements to P2 close. I will now also, can I take those items as noted by the committee? Thank you. I would now like to move that the committee approves 1. The creation of 4 new reserves to account for Section 31 pupil premium, Business Planning Reserve, Bristol Harbour Reserve and DSG Surplus Reserve. 2. The release of 8.2 million corporate inflation budget and a 4.5 million pay inflation budget, representing latest changes to employers' national insurance contribution percentage and threshold, as approved in the 25-26 budget, but not initially allocated to Directorate's cash limits. And 3, the drawdown in period 2 of 0.1 million from the Capital Feasibility Fund. Can I ask for a seconder for that motion?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Classip. Can I ask all those in favour to show their hands? That's passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item number 8, managing our debt, project funding approval and progress update. I'd like to advise the committee that this report seeks approval to spend £613,041 from the Transformation Reserve to put in place additional resource into a corporate debt recovery team for a fixed term to lead on maximising income collection and a debt recovery for accounts receivable debts across the council, and develop a proof of concept to inform the outline business case for how this should be done in the future. This is a key decision as it involves spend over £500,000, and I would like to invite Andy Rothery, Director of Finance, to outline the report. Andy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report is one of our top-tier transformation programs in terms of helping manage our financial situation, in terms of getting better control and sustainability into our finances. So the really real sort of headline figure for me is the fact that we've got across all of our debt types around 200 million of outstanding debt, and the essence of this program is in the title, in a way, managing our debt that is building capacity and skills into the council so we can start through our revised debt policy ensuring that we are helping people pay for when they buy council services. So in effect, the team is bringing in additional capacity, not only to help address where we've got debt held in arrears, but also get better process and practice in, so it makes charging and collecting income much easier. It's something where we're going through a journey internally with officers on this. It is a real collective area of responsibility where, as a council, we charge for many services, and each different service is underpinned by a different kind of type of debt. So trying to make sure that we've got the right corporate support and corporate control in place is part of what this resource is for, but also then through good governance and good practice under our Managing Our Debt Board, we're having a regular conversation about arrears and income, because when we set the budget, we set an income level. Income involves providing those services and meeting demand when people are buying, but also collecting that money as well. So we're realising that income, and that's how we'll avoid landing with significant arrears. We are mindful through the project that different approaches are needed, because some debt will be related to adult social care from people's contributions, and an approach for having a debt conversation in adult social care will be very different to someone paying for their green bin collection or paying for a parking fine. So it's, very different approaches are needed, and that the project is mindful of that approach, that we ensure we tailor our process and our approach to the debt type. So just to summarise, I think I'll just pick on one of the statistics that's in the paper. It's good to notice that in terms of outstanding debt, at an average level, it has been significant on the arrears, 859 days since the conversations and the project started around debt, it has moved to 692 days. We have got some way to go. You know, we really want to be getting that down to under 100 days, but it does show that we've got a journey to go through, and that's what this, you know, this project is really doing, is making sure we are now building corporate capacity in the council to start managing our debt and managing our arrears. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions or comments? Tom, then Tom B, then Tom R.
Just a brief one from me. So, broadly in favour of us doing our best to help with debt management, and there's a lot of stuff in the Equalities Impact Assessment about how this will help people's mental health and, giving them some structure and debt management and dealing with it early before it becomes a crisis point, and that's really good. But I think we also need to acknowledge that people, who are in struggling circumstances may find it challenging when they are, suddenly have it thrust in their face, depending on our approach. So it might help to just go over what our plans are for initial engagements and how we can help reassure people that no, it isn't a crisis yet, and here's how we're going to help you. That the approach we take, I think, is going to be really helpful. So any clarity on that would be really appreciated.
Okay, I'm going to ask Graham to cover this, because we've had this conversation many times as officers, and Graham Services do deal with business rates and council tax debt. So I think using kind of council tax maybe as an example, Graham, would be great, because that's something we've been discussing.
So Graham Clapp, Head of Revenues and Benefits. Excuse me, frog in the throat. So just a couple of observations on that from me. First one is, and I know it's referenced, that one of the changes we made from the policy we had before is we removed one of the reminder letters, and what we found that reminder letter wasn't really making a great deal of difference. It was just another letter that someone put in the pile of the rest. So having the conversation about the debt as soon as we can is a really helpful thing. But what's also really important is if anyone makes representation or a body makes representation on their behalf, that we instigate what we call breathing space. So that gives them the opportunity, if they can provide evidence, that they don't have to look at this straight away. But what we need to make sure that we do within that are conversations about a reasonable plan that will enable the individual to make a contribution where they can to pay their debt.
Can I make one other small point on that? And I may have missed this in the impact assessment, if so I apologise. While it's not an area I have personal experience with, I do know that people who have ADHD have particular problems in this area, and then we may need to be sensitive of that particular challenge when helping them out. And I think that's just, I don't know if that's already being done, but if it isn't, it's something we should look at.
Certainly, we always look at vulnerability, and vulnerability would include ADHD.
Tom.
I've got a few questions, as you might imagine. So you might have answered this first one, because I just wanted to know the first bit of 2.3 paragraph, what that actually meant in plain English, where it talks about removal of non-statutory recovery notices from the 1st of April. Is it just that first reminder letter that you didn't?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. That's quick. Can I ask, the table that we've included talks about outstanding debt for each debt type at the 30th of September 2024. Was there not more recent data available? Some of it is buried in the appendices of the previous item, but I'm just a bit confused as to why we've used September 24 data and not something more recent.
Yeah, we've got a debt report which is coming fairly soon, and I think we're in the process of compiling, so that should be out relatively soon. But as Andy referenced, one of the challenges with the debt report is we're bringing various different services debt in from various different places to all be brought together at the same time, so whether that be clean air zone, green bin, adult social care, and that's recorded in slightly different ways and with certainly different timeframes, and also different expectations as to when you should pay and amount of time before it's chased. So that's caused some of the challenges, but we certainly will have some revised up-to-date figures fairly soon.
Do we know what the total outstanding debt figure to the council was on the 31st of March?
This one says 200 million, doesn't it?
That report's being finalised at the moment, so I think it will be coming to the next Strategy and Resources Committee.
Okay, so you don't know at the moment?
Well, I was at managing our debt board this morning, and I saw the figure, but I don't want to pull it off the top of my head. It was certainly a reduction.
Okay. It'd be helpful if there's just perhaps a follow-up email afterwards.
Yeah, of course.
Although we'd obviously quote figures out of thin air if you're not confident in them. The bit I also just wanted to actually dive into, was the revised debt management policy. So thank you for the email I got on part of the answer, which in of itself raises questions. So we've got a new managing our debt policy. The previous one had lots of appendices attached to it and went through cabinet in a very transparent manner. So have those appendices gone? Do they still exist? Or have you just moved to the 8-page policy that we've now got?
We've simplified it in order to try and make our approach to collecting debt easier, and so that's why the new policy is what it is, and does, as you say, remove that first reminder letter.
So all those appendices gone, including the ones showing different types of enforcement approaches for different types of debt? Is that all gone now? Is it just the same enforcement approach regardless of debt type?
It isn't the same approach with regard to enforcement of debt types, so I'll get you an answer on that.
Yeah, and I think what I am concerned about is the fact this hasn't come to committee, and it was dealt with in a chair's briefing, by the looks of it, on the 13th of March is the answer I've had. The answer I've also had says you're yet to publish a decision notice. Is that still correct?
Yeah, because this has been a revision to an existing policy, it's been an officer decision in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the committee, because we have many policies that sit under other policies, so this is almost an operational policy that sits underneath our financial regulations, and it is an amendment to an existing policy. It's not a new policy. That's why it didn't come to the committee to have a full discussion, because it isn't a brand new policy. It's housekeeping of an existing policy.
But it does affect everyone in the city, would affect more than 2 wards, and is in relation to more than £500,000 of existing finances. So in my view, it should have done for transparency, given the high public interest that there is in how we manage our debt, particularly around the use of enforcement agents and bailiffs.
Okay, so
the question I have got is, if this was signed off on the 13th of March, why hasn't the officer decision notice yet been published? Because it's now the 14th of July. I'm just going off the email that was sent to me. So.
Because given it is an update to an existing policy and not a new decision, the third advice was that a decision notice was potentially not required, but for full transparency, I'm happy for it to be posted as an officer decision notice.
But why has it taken 4 months to publish the officer decision notice?
Because it is an amendment to an existing policy, so not a requirement.
Really?
Yep.
That doesn't sound correct, that we can just leave it months to publish officer decision notices.
Well, we can get you a clarified position, but I also suspect we can probably make sure it's published as well.
Chair, yeah, we absolutely can. I think what I thought I heard was that the original advice was that an officer's decision notice wasn't needed. On balance, we decided that we should have one, and that's why that's now being published. I think that's what the director said.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the email in front of me. It talks about the decision being taken 4 months ago and still not published. So I think that's a transparency issue.
Chair, just to say that is noted. I heard what you said, and it sounds like we will be publishing the notice. So for transparency.
Yeah, I think, can we also look into how long it takes for officer decision notices to be published after a decision is made? Some of these things can be quite material. And then I just wanted to check then for rent debt, so housing revenue account. Are you now using bailiffs to collect that debt, or does it remain the position of the council not to use bailiffs for housing rent debt?
That's one that we'll need to take away and speak to the housing team and get back to you on.
Okay, it was in the corporate debt management policy as explicitly excluded.
I'm pretty sure they don't, but I will confirm.
Thank you.
Patrick, did you have your hand up?
I did, thank you, Chair. Thanks again for this. It's good that we are putting the resources into collecting debt that is owed to the council, and I like that we're talking about having better identification of vulnerable debtors. That's a really good evolution of the current policy. I think it's also really important because we want to have public confidence in the council and our ability to raise revenue fairly, which doesn't happen when people feel like they can not pay their fees and charges with impunity. I did have a couple of questions about the specific figures as well, please. I noted in the green table in the main report, we've got talking about overpaid housing benefit. Is that us overpaying housing benefit, or is that central government overpaying housing benefit that we then collect?
That's us overpaying benefit, but there are two types, and I'm trying not to make this too technical. There are errors that we make, and there are errors made by either the landlord or by the individual, and obviously we do not recover one of those types.
Okay. So if we make a mistake, do you know what the rough breakdown between us making a mistake and others making a mistake what would be then?
I can get that for you.
Thank you. Because it would obviously be good if we can put resources into more resources into making sure we don't make those mistakes, so they're appreciating how stretched the teams are. And also, we've got a lot of debt, 28.6 million from the clean air zone. That seems excessively high for what it is. Is that because it's an easier charge to dodge, or is it just the teams need more resourcing?
How can I answer that? I think first thing I would say is I'll give you an update on the actual debt figure, because I've got it now for the end of March, and that figure's gone down substantively. I think there were real difficulties in the early part of the clean air zone with regard to willingness to pay, and I think that might be a factor as to why our amount was so high. I think the longer it's come in and the more established it's been, certainly when the figures are published for March 25, there's quite a reduction there. Just therefore, I said it was under 200 million. It's 197,766,462 pounds. So let's say 198k to make it easier.
Councillor Townsend.
Yeah, thanks for that updated figure. Is there any one particular area that's been brought down on in terms of the debt, or?
I'll get you a breakdown.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Sibs.
Thanks.
And then Tom B.
I'm sure, as you mentioned, that to get this far off the data is quite a complicated process nonetheless, different reporting, different timescales. So my first question is really about, in order to improve on this and have a better hindsight of it, was the data collection approach and kind of organization streamlining the timelines for collections and so forth, so that it's simple for all services. You know, if it's going to be 90 days for everything, because then you know it's just 90 days. Is that something that we have the ability to influence, or the collection process will consistently and continuously be different for all different departments?
A bit of both is the honest answer. I think there are things we can learn and things we can improve within our presentation of the report and the process and the collection. However, there will always be different rules that apply to different debts and the amount of time that you're expected to repay them. So that will always provide the challenge that you're trying to compare sometimes oranges with apples.
Yeah.
But we're making some progress. And also it is worth pointing out that the debt report is, I think we're on to like the third iteration of this. And every time we do it, with the greatest respect, we get different asks from different councillors in different ways that different things want to be presented, which is fine. But it all feeds into a continuous improvement and a slight change. So sometimes it's quite difficult to look at 23-24 and say 24-25 because they're being reported in slightly different ways. And certainly one of the ways we've looked at is now just classifying debt as debt that's overdue rather than due. Yeah. Because, you know, I pay council tax in Bristol, and if I don't pay the day after I'm due to, it's due, but it's not overdue yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe it is, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. And, you know, I think with that, seeing it from a customer perspective, where you have all of this intelligence as a dashboard, where you can see your rent arrears in one place, makes it a lot simpler for someone to really see where they are across all their bills, you know, learning difficulties and so forth. But when you have to juggle the admin of life on a low income, in an overcrowded house, you know, the admin of life is what would really get to you, you know, regardless of your your education or whatever, but the admin of life takes up so much time if these things are consistently in a siloed approach. So what can we do to reduce the burden of the admin of life for our parents on low income, multiple jobs, multiple debt levels, to kind of streamline the process that visually, when you log into your housing benefit account or to your universal credit, it's simple, it's clear, and we're utilizing our own intelligence of making it simpler for people.
I think the first step is we need to build our own internal intelligence about our citizens. So we do understand that if we have someone who is struggling to pay, it might be their council tax, but it might be a number of other charges as well. So we can then start thinking about things at a user level rather than at a system or service level. So I think that is the first step. But that's really getting into the heart of this programme, because the first step is just bringing in some capacity so we can have that council-wide conversation about debt and helping people pay. But the next step will be about how can we start redesigning our systems and our processes to make it easier for for managing the debt, because that is a corporate health measure around collecting income, but actually having those early conversations with individuals, because if they are struggling to pay, there may be other issues that we need to talk to them about as well. So at a citizen interaction level, there are lots of benefits as well.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. From the housing side, I see how the homeless prevention team is really trying to work on that element before people get to debt and how they manage it. But I wouldn't know how other committees are actually trying to do it. One of the things that, looking at the business rates, potentially is an ask for the team that sits over business rates. Maybe it's this one, I don't know. Is when you see the amount of vendors, right? And we've got businesses that are now incurring additional costs, but when you have more vendors in the city centre, you're actually taking away the income that our high street shops and our retail shops need in order for them, to have sufficient income to employ and to pay their business rates, So I think sometimes it's like trying to be everything to everyone, and then this has adverse impacts. So I'd like to see some innovation between each of these. Like, what is the innovation? Before it gets to this, what happens? I understand from the temporary accommodation and housing part, but from the other services, before it gets to this debt management of let's go get it, what are the different interventions that kind of kicks in place so you can see this is the last end of the straw and we act because this hasn't been done, this hasn't been done. These are the multiple engagements before we actually started to act. So you can really, I've read your policy and I can see how empathetic and supportive it's kind of tailored to be and really, bespoke to different communities and different needs, language and all that stuff. But without understanding that, you would have tried 50 different levels of engagement to the teams, the housing team, whatever. This makes it like simple to kind of attack on this and not really see your wider vision. Just bring your wider vision, because I think you're doing some great stuff.
Can I just respond to that? I think, Sibs, what you're touching upon is something which we are already trying to do, is making it that simpler. You mentioned housing, and one of the major changes that's going place in the new housing director at the moment is exactly that. We've had situations in the past where individual tenants have had to go from pillar to place, and each time have had to repeat their story all over again. And what we're trying to do is to make it as simple as possible. It should be up to us to make it easier for the residents in Bristol to get the services they need without making it more complicated than it needs to be. However, one of the problems we do face is sometimes we're not always the one in control of what information is needed and how that information is passed forward. Sometimes it may be other parts of the public sector, or it may be government legislation which is different from ours. But what I hopefully can reassure you is that that entire thing of looking at how we can make it as easy as possible for people to get access to the services they need, and when they do, and if they do get into problems, also get access to the support they need so that they can manage those problems without getting into an even worse situation. So I hope that reassures you a bit. I've now got Councillor Classic.
Thank you. I think actually most of my question was answered in what you've just said, but to kind of follow on from that, it's good to hear there's work on the culture of the sort of citizen side of accessing our services. I recently myself moved, while I was waiting for a sort of permanent place to live, moved into a sort of temporary accommodation, and I have to say, well, I know I was generating a lot of admin for the council tax team, but at one point I had 3 letters, each dated I think a couple of days apart, all saying slightly different numbers of a bill, and I was all right, I could handle that, but there are a lot of residents in the city who that would completely throw them, and that would be a real barrier and an issue to paying their council tax properly. And I think that does maybe into the, there's a point under 2.11 about the establishing a centralised debt recovery team to make sure that the debt is valid and cleanse it, and ensuring that we do have the correct debt figures and that what is owed is genuinely owed and not just issues on our side, because I think certainly I as a councillor, and probably most councillors here, will have had casework from people who, you know, thought their council tax was fine, thought that it was all okay, but have ended up with chasing letters, potentially even debt recovery, you know, not just council tax, but also as we've talked about other forms. So that, I think that is a real key point to our debt recovery, is ensuring that what we are collecting is correct and that residents are protected in that sense.
Fair point. I mean, the first thing I say is clearly 3 letters in 3 days all saying different things. We need to look into that. I mean, not because it's a councillor, but because we shouldn't be doing that. The second thing I would say is it's probably still the case that, and I know it sounds like an excuse, but it is still the case that we're recovering on the council tax side from the pandemic period. So from that, I know we can't keep saying the pandemic, but we did make a decision to suspend recovery across the board, which we're very comfortable with, and that was a decision we made. But we are still retrieving our workload position. So that has had an impact, and it would be wrong of me to say that it hasn't. We've still got arrears of work outstanding that, you know, I would prefer we had a bit lower.
Okay, thank you. Tom and then Annie.
I think. Oh, were you before me?
I thought I was. Very quickly. Okay. Just a very quick one on business rates, taking that point into COVID and how that interacts with a number of debt recovery efforts, just on that point of business rates and the rest of it, is that again a COVID issue recovery where we've got a problem, or are there particular businesses where we're seeing debts and business rates not being paid? Are there specific businesses, or is it just a recovery thing?
Just on business rates, our workload position is actually quite good. We're in a much better place correspondingly than we are with council tax. Smaller team, so work outstanding is pretty decent, really. I think the bigger challenge with business rates has been changes in rules with regards to reliefs and confusion, sometimes understandably on a business's part, whether they are or not entitled to that, and the time that it's taken to explain that. And then, of course, sometimes it's good news and sometimes it's bad news. And when it's bad news, you might have arrears. So that's, I think, the bigger challenge. On business rates work, because I had the work figures in this morning, and I'm pretty comfortable with where we are work outstanding-wise on business rates. I would just say, though, as a team, it's about a fifth the size of council tax.
Good on them. You can see that, you know, they're clearly working quite hard, but there's not a particular pattern in this. It's not like, say, you know, just as an example, restaurants and pubs are having problems with business rates and other ones are fine. It's general and generally confusion or legal related rather than the businesses in particular.
I think there are certain areas that have more of a difficulty with understanding reliefs than others, but I wouldn't want to highlight a specific one now.
I think, of observation and a question, my observation is, you know, however the policy has come to be in terms of its update aside, it's how these things are done in practice. And, you know, I've had casework where bailiffs are turned at the door of mums and their children in temporary accommodation, and elderly people who are at the end of their retirement and just very upset and distraught. So there is an issue with the way bailiffs are continuing to deal with age debt that is being referred to them. And I've had cases flagged to me where they're being told that the individual is vulnerable, and then they're pursuing the debt anyway. And what should be happening is it should be coming back to the council. So I think what we need to make sure we do, I think it's covered a bit in the work programme update, the next item, is that we look at what's actually going on in practice with some of those types of debt and the way it's being approached, because what we don't need to do is cause people more hardship than is absolutely necessary, particularly with those that are in the not the won't pay category, but those perhaps in the can't pay category and are quite vulnerable. So that was my point. And then my question, just really for the benefit of the committee and perhaps anyone that is hopefully watching this, what do you mean by accounts recoverable? Because obviously the resource is focused, receivable, sorry, because the resource is focused for that particular type of debt, isn't it?
Okay, so yeah, accounts receivable, in the main, it's charges where we've made the fees and charges and raised invoices to individuals. So with class, paying your green waste bin, an invoice would probably be a direct debit charge because you probably set up because you pay it every year, but it would be something that we charge for. So and that could also be like a license application and a charge there. So accounts receivable is something where we're expecting to receive income from something we've charged. So it's different. So to almost simplify it, I'd say it's like above the line part of our revenue budget, where council tax and business rates is collection. It's collection fund money that we collect to then run the whole council. So that's the simple differentiation.
Just on the bailiff point, I have had quite a number of conversations with Councillor Mack. I know she's not here today, and I know she's really keen that we look at that. So I'm pretty sure we will be conducting a review of, because we've certainly on the council side, we've got two that do it, and we're looking at the policies and practices and also the vulnerability assessment side.
Yeah, I confirm that we are going to be looking at Annie.
Thanks. Yeah, just to sort of bounce off of something that Sarah said, and also Big Tom as well, about business rates. And in terms of like the casework that we get and the way in which we need to help residents, some of the things that I've picked up are with how the relief has changed. It's been quite tricky for some businesses where they've got a space that's in two different parts of a building, so they're being classed as two different spaces, even though it's under the same lease essentially, and being charged twice for business rates, that sort of thing. And they've found it very hard to get a response that's useful from the business rates department. And also the business rates department are doing an odd thing at the moment where they're sending out an email saying that you've had an email and you've got to log in using some kind of code, but there's no kind of information as to how you find that code. And that makes things very complicated, especially seeing as a lot of the businesses that I deal with tend to be smaller or creative businesses. And the ADHD is strong in our community, as Tom sort of noted as well, and all that makes it more complicated. And one of the conversations I've had with Graham before is like, how do we, as councillors, help people? And I've had a range of experience of sometimes I have to get the resident to sign a form to give me permission. Other times I've just picked up the phone and the council tax or the business rates team have just spoken to me because I've said I'm a councillor, which has question marks in terms of I could literally be anybody because there's no security checks on me. So it would be good to have some kind of clear process as to how we can actually advocate and help our residents and get the people on the other end of the phone to help us help our residents as well, because that's all just a little bit messy and a little bit unclear, and there's no standard procedure with it, and that would be something I think that would be helpful.
I was just going to say, but I'll pick it up separately if that's okay, because it is a little bit away from the actual item.
Okay. So I would like to move the Strategy and Resources Committee approves the proposal to spend £613.41, £613,041. I think I just reduced it by 1,000% then. So approves the proposal to spend £613,041 from the Transformation Reserve to put in place additional resources into a corporate debt recovery team and develop an outline business case for how this should be done in the future. And 2, delegates authority to the Director of Finance in consultation with the Leader and Chief Executive to approve and review the project budget and approve additional use of the transformation reserves in the event of programme slippage. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Can I ask for all those in favour to raise their hands? That looks unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 9, which is the Q1 25-26 Corporate Risk Report. As you have noticed, whilst Annie was talking, we've moved people around a bit because Nick has had to go to another meeting. So this report provides an update on current significant strategic risks to achieving the Council's objectives as set in the Corporate Strategy 2025 to 2030 and summarises progress in managing the risks and actions being taken as at Q1 25-26. The report is for information only, and I would like to invite Andy Rothery, Director of Finance, to outline the report.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and I'll keep this brief. I'll just go through the headline movement in the report. So there's 17 risks reported. One of these are critical, 15 are high, and one's medium. In terms of movement, there's 3 improving risks, 1 deteriorating risk, and there's 3 materialised risks. So the critical risk is CRR 60, that's failure of HRA stock to meet landlord's statutory obligations. The improving risks are possible in-year financial deficits, and we'll note that the outturn from 24-25 was a fully funded outturn, not requiring use of unearmarked general reserve, so that's the movement and improvement on that risk. Also, CRR 37, failure to successfully implement the Tackling Homelessness programme, and CRR 64, risk of adult social care market failure from inflationary pressures. There's 1 deteriorating risk, that's CRR 61, failure to manage the requirements set out in the construction design management framework. And the risks materialising are CRR 51, adult social care may be financially unsustainable due to national and local NHS pressures. CRR 58, possible failure to adequately maintain and replace highway traffic and parking infrastructure assets. That is a known risk. And CRR 60, failure of housing revenue account stock to meet landlord statutory obligations, which we touched on was a key risk. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And just to say, this report is for noting. Do I have any questions or comments? Councillor Blenkinsop.
Just a brief comment, and admittedly this is with WECA as much of us, but I think it's quite, considering the risks that we had earlier when it came to CRSTS funding, it's very reassuring that we've been able to move so quickly on that. So I just want to make a point that that's, transport team should, and the committee should be very much commended for getting that resolved with WECA.
Okay, thanks, Tom. It is nice to have 752 million, I have to say. Tom R.
Thank you. I just want to probe the finance risk reducing so significantly. The balance position last year was achieved because that one-off funding, about 14.9 million that we got from the business rates pool that was distributed. So had that not come through, we'd have been operating at a deficit, wouldn't we, of almost 15 million. We're already at a position where we're in deficit, and potentially that could go to 20.5 million, assuming it stabilises at that or goes to that point. So why are we so significantly reducing the financial deficit risk when actually we've got more financial pressures materialising? It just seems counterintuitive. So it'd just be great to understand that a bit more.
I think what we've really got to do with risk management is make sure that we are moving risks, because if they get held at a certain fixed level, you almost kind of accept that risk tolerance level is happening in the organisation. So the fact that during 24-25 there was good work to de-risk, and I note there was a one-off year-end balance that did help in terms of the year-end financing, but there are positive steps being put in place in terms of ongoing financial management to control the risk in years. So that's why it has been stepped down. It is still a key risk. It's just noting that it has moved from a period where ongoing financial uncertainty and the risk of actually using general reserves was the live driver in that risk. So it may come up again, but it is better, I think, to have that risk movement and reassessment happening regularly, so you don't almost become a little bit sort of numb to that risk because it just stays tolerated.
Okay, thank you. So it may go back up again, but your view at the moment is it's reduced because there's more financial controls in place? I'm just trying to understand why it's reduced so much, because you've taken it down to 9 from...
So a fully funded year-end position has been one of the factors, and also having a reset budget and then having a budget management scheme where we are looking at mitigation and actions being mobilised from the second period in the financial year is a good starting position for the 25-26 budget.
Despite the deficits already appeared?
Yeah, because that's a reported deficit, and there are steps in place now being undertaken to manage that down.
Okay.
John.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question on cyber risk. M&S and the Co-op have obviously had cyber attacks which have left them with quite a lot of problems, and in the wake of that, a lot of retailers and other organisations have stepped up their cyber security. They've reviewed cyber policy quite comprehensively. Now, I know those attacks have been in the private sector, not the public sector, but clearly we are also at risk. In the light of what's happened, are we reviewing, I think it's just as our cyber risk is seen as constant, unchanged, but have we reviewed cyber risk at all?
I'll be able to take that away from and get an answer from the team who deal with cyber. I do understand that we have got a rolling contract with our cyber security firm, and I'd expect them to be always keeping themselves updated and on the front foot, because the risk to local government is just as high as the risk to private sector.
Patrick, then Sibs.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the cybersecurity. You neatly answered one of my questions there. I would I'll just praise the work that's been done, particularly on the improving risks, on the financial deficit, tackling homelessness, and out social care market. But there is this deteriorating risk where we've got a potentially where the severity of a potential risk materialising on injury to construction workforce under the construction design management framework. It does seem strange to me that the likelihood has, the severity has changed while the likelihood has not, because surely the severity of a construction accident is just as severe, whatever the framework is. And I'd hope we'd already have pretty high safety standards and so on. So I'm just wondering if we could drill a bit further into that, and just if you could explain why that risk has become more severe but not more likely.
Thanks, Councillor McAllister. I may turn to Pete Anderson on this. Pete, are you the risk going on? Steph's the risk going on this one. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you. I'd probably have to go back to find out the precise reason for that particular change, but a construction design management framework obviously supports the health and safety of working on some of our big sort of capital projects. We undertook some auditing work over the last few months just to test the compliance with the CDM framework amongst those projects, and I think at the time that this risk was reviewed, we still had some sort of gaps in our knowledge, and so I think as a consequence the risk level increased. I would have though expected to have seen that around likelihood rather than impact as you're describing. What I can reassure the committee of, though, is that audit work has now been completed. We have a much clearer idea of our compliance around this, and we do have quite a detailed action plan in place to ensure everybody is fully aware of their responsibilities, and that we have sort of checkpoints in place before risk assessment method statements are signed off ahead of work going ahead. So I'm confident that risk will come down for next quarter, but I will look into the precise detail of why it was the impact that changed rather than the likelihood.
Thank you very much. And quickly please, on CRR 9, possible failure of safeguarding vulnerable children, the three mitigating actions which are listed have all got 100% progress listed, which is really good, but obviously the risk tolerance is a lot lower than the current risk assessment. So what further work will be done to make sure that we are properly safeguarding children in our care? Thank you.
I'll need to take that one away and ask the safeguarding team to get back to you. Is that okay?
Sibs, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think for me, one thing to be noted really is the bold focus on our estates, because the impact of the housing consumer standards has unimaginable, and I think maybe through that estate audits, we'll slowly start to find out a bit more where we stand, and that could raise the risk level, that could raise the financial burden and so forth. And it's just legacy undealt with issues. So really being brave on focusing on this is something that I'd want to say great and thank you for that. My question to you, Andy, is what are the kind of impacts that we're seeing since going to the Ombudsman or the consumer standards in terms of our fire risk, and how is this actually impacting our major projects, capital projects?
I'll answer from my involvement, but I may also ask Pete to come in on the housing standards, but really around fire safety risk, because it applies not just to housing, but to all of our occupied estate. But from my involvement, by recognising that the risk within our housing stock, but then putting in a programme to manage it, has raised the awareness corporately in the council. I'm much more involved now. I know much more about our insurance arrangements and the steps that our insurers expect us to take in terms of managing all parts of the building to reduce housing risk, from the structural elements of the building through to the occupation in the building, and raising awareness with tenants as well around fire safety, and those steps are being put in place and implemented. So I've seen that journey just from my first 6 months in the council, and being part of that is actually really positive, because I can see that it's being treated as a key corporate risk, as it should be, because it's in our corporate risk register. Pete, do you want to come in also?
I think two things from me. We've got a fire advisor within the corporate health and safety team who's worked closely with corporate landlord, so confident that our buildings are compliant in the context of fire risk assessments and getting them in a timely way, leading us to be able to do the works required before that compliance is considered for renewal, is something that we need to work better out to ensure that we have a timely and set programme for our works. But it's been really useful for the work around policy review of health and safety across the estate, from Legionella, water, fire, asbestos, etc., to get those policies up to date, and then to provide the resources where we need it. So there is a review working with staff in relation to health and safety to ensure that we've got the resources where we need it, both in corporate landlord service, within housing, and also within the corporate health and safety team. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's really brilliant in terms of that huge kind of context that sits within this risk register, because it's not the fact that these are new approaches, you're going to find new things, and you're finding great ways to be able to deal with it. So again, a huge one. One thing that I'd like us to kind of really keep our eye on is when it comes to that risk assessment and the quality of the risk assessments, to make sure that we don't necessarily see a decline in that whilst we're doing the audit, is to kind of keep them in alignment. So as you're doing the audits, keep the risk assessments up, or is there another reason why they've kind of slightly gone down?
So was your question specific around risks unduly de-escalating through the audit process? Yeah, I think we have got a good methodology for corporately assessing risks. So it is really considered in terms of the risk scoring. So I think it's almost that point I made about the financial management, where things have changed, so the scoring does go down a little bit, but it doesn't mean that we're not making sure that this is still the one that's driving all of our conversations. So building safety will always be at the top in terms of leadership conversations, the same as financial management. This is why we're here having a conversation about the corporate risk register. Behind that, we'll have divisional and directorate risk registers as well that have all risk, but some of them, they're just business as usual, but other ones will stay at the top until they're fully resolved, and some can never be fully resolved. They'll just be ongoing. So that's what the attention that we give things.
Okay, thank you. Tom R.
This might need to be taken away. Also on TR 60, there's quite a few mitigating actions talking about NEC, so the new IT system. Is there anything you can share here about just how that's going, the implementation of the IT? So I'm just aware it's overdue. It's been it's something that I launched way back when, several years. I know these things take a very long time to do, so it's just good to understand where are we up to, because data is as good as, one, the recording of it in the first place, and then two, the systems you've got in place for it to be recorded within.
I'll be able to get a project update. Yeah, I'm not on the group that's doing the implementation, but I know it's being talked about on a weekly basis. So in terms of the spec and the design of the system, I don't know if Peter, you're involved in the NEC housing system project.
Not the housing, no, sorry. No.
Okay.
We'll get back to you, Tom. Any more comments or questions? Okay, in that case, I would like to ask the committee to note the report as per the recommendation. Can I take that report as noted? Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is another information item for noting, which is the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee Work Programme update. This report simply provides an update on the committee's work programme following the latest 6 monthly policy committee work programme setting workshop. I'd like to invite Ian Erd, Policy Committee Coordinator, to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. Just further to your comments, just point out particularly the task and finish groups. In terms of the culture working group, I think the discussion on the day indicated that the group will be continuing through 25-26, but there was a request for a progress report to come to this committee in October. And I think as Councillor Renard mentioned just now, in terms of the task and finish group on supporting low-income households, I think there's a suggestion that should widen and look at the existing approach to enforcement agents across services and whether that approach is being followed consistently as a new, but there'll be a scoping conversation on precisely how that will be taken forward.
Okay, thank you.
Essentially for information.
Yep. Any questions or comments? Councillor Renard.
Thank you for this report. I think it would be helpful if this had some timelines attached to it. So if it's going to be a work programme, it should be clear, what's coming when and what are the timelines. So could we get an updated version of this first as almost as an appendix, just with, right, here's the August meeting, here's the September meeting, what's coming when. And I think on caring economy, I think just doing it as an all-member briefing doesn't feel sufficient to me to cover that particular item. We do need to make sure that this council is following policy that has been passed and that it's expected to implement. So I think that should come as a paper to this committee or whichever one it needs to go to. Sometimes these things are cross-cutting, aren't they? So whilst it's helpful to see this, I think it would have been helpful to have more time ahead of the meeting today to review this in advance, because it came quite late in the day after the agenda briefing a couple of weeks ago on the Thursday, the day before the meeting was due to publish. I did flag those concerns at the time, so I think there's further work to do, and I think, Tony, it'd be good to have a meeting with you to discuss it.
Yeah, no problem. Any more questions or comments? Sibs.
Yes, I'd agree about the timelines and potentially also maybe just a reference of attendance, just so we can ensure that our colleagues are kind of, well informed at the space and time that the actual task and finish groups are actually taking place. It's great to see item number 17, strategic sale review. I think that's really an important piece. And also item 15 in terms of the actual indicators within the social value framework, because as Andy has discussed about the debt, I think we could utilize some of those indicators to address the needs that have been raised today.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Tom?
Just back onto the strategic SIL item. My understanding is we were going to look at the governance arrangements about streamlining and making sure it's coming to, say, one committee. I was on Transport Committee last week where emergency works have had to be approved to the new cut. They're urgent, critical, got to do it. An extra £5 million of strategic SIL has suddenly been found in order to do that. So I'm a bit concerned there isn't that coordination yet. I'm also interested, and I've written to the one file, so I appreciate you may not have got to it yet, just to understand how there's been so much improvement in our strategic SIL budget in such a short space of time to find that funding. So again, for one outside of here, it'd be good to pick up.
Okay, no problem. Any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, I would like to ask that the committee note the report as per the recommendations set out. So can I take that report as noted? Thank you. Moving now on to agenda item 11, which is the Bristol City Council Workforce Strategy 2025-2030. This report seeks approval of the Council's new workforce strategy, and I would like to invite Steph Griffin, Director of Workforce and Change, to outline the report. Steph.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, today we're bringing you for approval our revised workforce strategy. It's an internal-facing document that sits beneath the corporate strategy, and it's designed to ensure that we have the right skills in the right place to deliver on those priorities in the corporate strategy, and of course in turn deliver for our residents. We recognise that our workforce are one of our greatest assets, and so this strategy is going to guide our work on culture, recruitment and retaining of talent, investing in our colleagues' development and skills for the future, and also improving equity and inclusion. It's been developed in consultation with a number of internal focus groups, in particular with input from our staff-led groups. These represent our underrepresented colleagues in the organisation, so our Disabled Colleagues Network, Embrace, which represent racially minoritised communities, our Young Professionals Network, and our LGBT plus group. Also, we've had trade union input, and we've also had input from our HR committee, so we're very grateful for all of that input. The strategy itself sets out some high-level commitments and priorities, and it will be followed by a much more detailed action plan that will specify the tangible actions that we're going to take and how and when we'll deliver on those commitments. We'll keep the implementation of the strategy under review. That will be through our corporate leadership board, but we'll also bring regular updates to our HR committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Classett and Councillor Blinken.
Yeah, can I just check, in terms of the consultation with staff, was extra effort made to ensure that maybe more satellite staff, rather than just those sort of working in City Hall or our sort of buildings, were engaged with as part of this?
Yes, invites went out to all colleagues. I'd have to look at the detail as to exactly sort of where we had representation from, but there were a number of focus groups with colleagues all over the organisation, and in particular with our staff-led groups and trade unions. We had 2 or 3 opportunities over the recent months, so we feel we've been as expansive as we can be with that.
Tom.
Small question, but we reference LGBT quite a lot in the LGBT plus quite a lot in the area. But I note that the 210 table doesn't include trans people in the in it. It's only LGB. I wondered why that was.
Is this on page 15 of the?
Page 15.
Yes, so this is where we identify where we've got workforce diversity gaps. We don't reference transgender there because I don't believe there's enough citywide data for us to compare with. So it is just LGB.
Okay, thank you.
Annie, and then Patrick, and then Thomas.
Yeah, thanks. Partly what Tom's just asked. But yeah, I wanted to say firstly thanks, because there's very clearly a visible change in atmosphere, particularly in this building, and amongst officers it feels lighter and a happier place. It has done for the last year. And officers speak about feeling much more able to engage openly and without any fear of any repercussions, particularly able to sort of interact with members a lot more than they used to, which is a really great thing. Noting that diversity table and that the diversity is lower than the city demographics, I think there's a huge power that sort of members can take in being demonstrating leadership. I think Tony has done very well in the last week by sort of restating our support to the queer community and the trans community. I know Abdul Malik did a good pushback on some of the racism that we had on public forum, and I think that's the things that we can do as members. But what are you doing in order to increase the diversity? What work are you doing to increase the diversity of the workforce?
Thank you. I mean, that is why it's one big commitment within here. Obviously, we do have data on the profile of our workforce. What I would say is that that's not a complete picture at the moment. So we do have some gaps in our data, and what we want to do through this work is to encourage our colleagues to be comfortable and confident enough to declare their sort of equality data on our HR system. So that will give us that better picture. What we want to do is obviously work with our colleagues and those who represent them through these staff-led groups to really understand what might be the barriers to coming and working for the council, and what barriers there might be to progression. We've got a lot of commitments in here around relooking at our learning and development programmes and ensuring there's opportunities for progression and development, and for people to feel comfortable to develop their careers here in the council. So we want to kind of design that alongside those staff-led groups, so that it's something that they feel is really investing in them.
Great. I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but how many people do fill out that equalities data?
I think we've got something like 92% of people do. So there's about 7.8 to 8% that still don't feel comfortable, or perhaps haven't realised that that is a facility within our HR system. So we want to close that gap so that we have a really accurate picture of the diversity of our workforce.
Right, fab, thank you.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. It's really good to see what the council's doing to make ourselves a better employer. I've noticed a lot of the improvements in employee attitudes, but from 2019 to 2025, generally a really positive picture. I noted that there seems to be a particular challenge around the perception that senior leaders do not understand the challenges of day-to-day work. We've had a 45% improvement in that, but it's only up to 29%, which still seems pretty low. So I'm just wondering, what are we planning to do to try and address that? Is that a issue of cohesiveness within teams, or of management being overloaded and they can't support their subordinates effectively? Sorry, not subordinates, but you get the point.
Thank you. Yes, so we asked questions around direct line manager and team, and those questions are consistently really highly positive. The reference to senior leaders there are sort of heads of service and directors and above, so that those kind of senior levels within the organisation. Those figures have been consistently lower than those other areas for some time. Again, it's another priority within here that we want to ensure that there's greater visibility and connection between all colleagues and senior leaders. Our new chief exec has done an awful lot of work in that space to get out to different sites in the organisation to have in conversation with events. Just last week we had 2 events next door in the conference hall, connecting in with sort of middle managers, those who report into those senior leadership teams. So we're really looking for opportunities to connect. And again, as part of this strategy, we want to understand from colleagues what would help them feel that their senior leaders understand their roles better.
Thank you thank you very much. I also it's encouraging to hear we've got that ongoing. I've noted that one of the statistics is that 27% of colleagues feel the council's a better place to work than it was 12 months ago, which is the same figure as in 2019. Does that mean 63% think it's a worse place to work, or am I misreading those figures?
So what we don't include there are the negative and the neutral figures. So we will have a more expansive report on our whole results of the most recent survey, which will come through HR committee soon. So I wouldn't have those figures to hand, but I suspect there will be a fair amount of neutral, so people don't feel strongly either way. So those are those who've said they agree or strongly agree.
Thank you. Is that just? I appreciate you don't have the figures off the top of your head. Is that something you're worried about, or is it just pretty par for the course?
Well, we would of course always want that to be much higher, that's another area of the survey that does seem to be, in terms of positive responses, remain lower in comparison to the other answers. So again, that's why we want to really understand what's behind that and why people feel how they might do in responding to that survey.
Thank you. We've got the turnover rate has been listed. It was 8.8%. Is that in line for what we would hope for or expect?
It is. I might invite my colleague James to come in at this point, but I think our sort of thresholds of what would be a sort of a healthy turnover is somewhere between 10 and 15%. Is that right? So
it is.
Yeah.
And nothing further for me to say.
Okay, thank you. And last question, if I may, please, Chair. It's good to see that the experience of disabled employees' experiences of working for the council are improving, but I noted that their job satisfaction is a lot lower than non-able-bodied employees. And we've also seen that the disability pay gap has increased and the percentage of workforce profile has decreased in this same time period, which does seem to be a cause for alarm. So can I ask, what are we doing specifically to address that and encourage disability in the workplace? Thank you.
Yes, we are equally alarmed at those figures. We've been doing quite a bit of work with our Disabled Colleagues Network, and we have set up a project board where we're looking specifically at what those barriers are around the workplace experience for disabled colleagues. So we've done an awful lot of work in terms of reasonable adjustments and making sure that people receive the adjustments promptly. We've been looking at accessibility of our buildings, and also in line with right across the workforce and through our other staff-led groups, but also around what the barriers might be to applying for a role at the council and then getting some progression when you're here. So those are kind of the key areas that we've been working on, but clearly there's a lot more that we need to be doing in that space.
I've got Tom Netz, then John, then Sibs.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting when the more detailed staff survey results come forward. So I think it's interesting that on the one hand, Councillor Townsend says that they're hearing from people that it's a much better place to work, but actually only 27% feel that it is, which is the same as it was in 2019. So it's interesting just to see what's the detail that sits behind that and what other improvements can be made. On a figure that has gone up since 2019, it was really interesting, is around mental health and well-being, which is up from 50% in 2019 to 69%. Obviously, it's still off probably where we admit we'd like it to be. And I was just interested, before I come back on a couple of other things, what steps are in place really to try and drive further improvement there.
So again, it's sort of an ongoing dialogue with the workforce around what support would work best for them. We have, as part of our health and safety function, we have a small wellbeing team who can support individuals. We have a suite of mental health first aiders, I think around about 400. James might be able to correct me if that's wrong, but that's where colleagues come forward to be trained as mental health first aiders, so they're out there as allies in the workplace to support people if they are feeling unwell in any way. There's a really big network that we bring those colleagues together and improve their practice. We have an employee assistance helpline, so it's a 24/7 online and phone line where people, if they need any support, have that at their fingertips. But it's, again, an ongoing dialogue that we want to have with the workforce in terms of how we can support them best in that, which is, again, why we've sort of created that as a priority here.
Thank you. And then a big area of interest and really brought me with young children is around the approach to maternity adoption and paternity support. So it's good to see that that's going to be reviewed, referenced in here. What will be really helpful is when that action plan comes forward. It's the devil in the detail of how long that's going to take. And the other thing I'd flag is there's obviously been a recent government announcement on the 1st of July that they're carrying out a full review of parental leave, which I think I've seen in the report will take about 18 months. So it'd be good to make sure we align with that. So obviously what we don't want to do all this work take a new policy through and then after then readjust about 6 months later. It'd be good to be keeping in lockstep with that. And it's interesting to see that, 1 in 3 dads still aren't taking paternity leave. And actually we know that shared parental leave has had really, really poor uptake across the board. And it is really important that, because I think we're at largely statutory minimums, aren't we, in terms of what we provide as a set of policies, that we look at the impact that has on individuals about do they want to come and work for us as a place of work, and whether really we're in line with where we need to be compared with other councils and compared with other sectors. So I'd really encourage us to be quite bold when we're moving forward in this area and make sure we make it as supportive an environment as it can be for parents and those to be. Thank you.
Okay, John.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick sort of asked my question, but I will press on with it if I may. It's to do with staff turnover. 8.8%, it's a figure. James, I think you were very happy with it. But how does it compare with our neighbouring authorities?
I'm not sure we have that data to hand today, but obviously benchmarking is something that's really important in terms of how we assess that. I think our turnover has come down in recent years. I think COVID had a big impact on our turnover rate. I suspect we are largely in line with our neighbours, but we are currently undertaking benchmarking across a whole range of workforce measures. So that's something that we'd be very happy to bring back more information on.
Thanks, Steph. I think benchmarking is important because people ultimately vote with their feet. So it's not how they just tick a staff survey box, it's how they actually act.
Okay, thanks, John. Sibbs.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for the report, Steph. I just wanted to find out a bit more about the progress. So if we had to look at the staff employment journey, and how many people are moving vertically and versus horizontally, how often does that happen? What's the training that one kind of receives from doing, let's say, estate cleaning to that progression of other roles? What is the progressional ladder, and how often are we seeing people move higher towards further income opportunities within the council? The second part is I'd really like to see a budget that's with this. I mean, understandingly, it draws from different opportunities, but a ring-fenced budget kind of builds staff confidence to say that this is some sort of certainty that issues will be addressed or certain programs will be in place. Interestingly enough, I think we're all quite aware of the investments made to progressional training, but either rightfully or wrong or not, the important thing is what's been the outcomes of some of that investment towards the progression of those from ethnic minoritized background that we need to see, investment and outcome. Has that actually happened? Is there much that we can really celebrate and see that progression? And I'll finish off by saying that, those are my 4 points. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, we have a snapshot at the very back of the strategy that gives an indication of pay progression by equality groups. It's obviously a fairly sort of crude analysis. What sits behind that, though, is some more detailed analysis, and we do bring via HR committee more detailed reports in terms of progression and where we've got starters and leavers across the organisation. But I think as part of the commitment of this strategy, we want to work with our colleagues to understand what kind of development they might need and what that feels like in terms of developing their careers with us. We do have evaluation of our learning and development programmes, but I think we probably need to bring all that all together as a single report, and that might be something that we bring forward via HR.
Yeah, that would be really useful to kind of see where we've been and where we're going, and those lessons kind of taken. And additionally, we have a network of other employers. What is that total progression of people further from the labour market through our kind of network of employers? What is that doing? Is that something within your portfolio? Is it only just within the council's kind of remit that you look, or are you also looking at our joint kind of collaboration of employers?
So this work is primarily obviously internal facing and for the council, but we do some benchmarking, particularly in relation to race HR data. So there is this year work going on to benchmark with public sectors across the city. It's part of the Race in the City work. And this year we'll get a really clear sense of benchmarking of those progression and diversity profiling of those organisations. So it's another way that we can benchmark ourselves against.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think we have any more comments or questions. So what I would like to do is move the recommendation of the report, which is that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves Bristol City Council's workforce strategy for 2025-2030. Can I ask for a seconder, please?
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I now have to hand over my seat to Councillor Classett. Please be as kind and courteous to Sarah as you would have been to me normally.
All right, thank you. So next item on the agenda is item 12, vehicle parts and managed stores contract, and I think that's with you, Pete, isn't it? So.
Thanks, Chair. So this report outlines our approach, seeking approval to procure and award a new vehicle parts and managed store contract. The report outlines that we have over nearly 1,500 vehicle and tool plant assets across the council, and the current procurement framework we use and has meant that the expenditure against the requirements of need is mean that we're going to be hitting the ceiling in September of this year. So we are keen to bring forward our reprocurement, which would have been next September, to ahead of this September, to provide a compliant route to market and a headroom of a financial ceiling for us to cover the expenditure needed across our very extensive fleet services. The paper on page 225 does break down or 224, sorry, does break down the examples of assets that we have in fleet, and this demonstrates the scale. So we're seeking approval to go out on a new framework to increase to create our financial envelope over the next 4 years up until September 28. Thanks.
Do you have any comments or questions on that report? I've got Patrick, then Tom and Tom.
Thank you for this report. It seems fairly self-explanatory, but could I just check, and I may be misunderstanding the premise here, did we consider going out to tender for a new supplier instead of just carrying on with the old one, or are we just looking to effectively extend the contract we've currently got with the current supplier? I couldn't quite make that out.
So it will be via a tender, via a framework. So the bids will be coming in via that framework. The TPPL framework is defined in the report. So if that will obviously be attractive to bids, and then we will score accordingly depending on what we get in.
Thank you.
At the risk of asking a very blunt and slightly stating the obvious question, the contract spend will be within available budgets, and if in future years there is a financial pressure created by the 10% increases mentioned in the paper, this will need to be incorporated into budget setting. Do we expect a financial pressure, considering the council's financial state at the moment? Do we expect a financial pressure for next budget?
Clearly, the level of assets we have potentially will present an increase of budget required in services. Fleet recharge their services to the need of individual services. So we would expect that individual services would control that spend. and through budget setting in the annual cycle, they would identify how much they need to enable them to deliver their service requirements from a vehicle fleet. We as fleet services would then therefore maintain and service, but I would expect those services to identify, manage and work through what budget is required to enable us to deliver a compliant fleet and asset base for fleet.
So at present, it's going to depend on what they say. We don't know clearly what it's going to look like yet.
Yeah.
When do you think we will be able to know that?
So we've got, we've got enough budget going into next year. So, but I would expect through the budget setting process, which we started now on an annual basis, those conversations are had with fleet, with the relevant service area to identify how those costs to be built in. So it's difficult to say based on their need whether they are looking to reduce their fleet or become, or for example, decommission old bits of plant or fleet required. So we would expect that to be on an annual basis with those services.
Okay, so with respect to the financial side of it, we don't know if this is going to lead to increased financial pressures given our financial position, and we won't know that until we've gone through the budget setting process for next year. Am I correct in that statement?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's not quite a reassuring answer I was hoping for, but very much I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for this. I wanted to ask about the vehicle side of our fleet. What percentage at the moment is EV of our fleet, and how will this new contract cater for what I assume will be an increase in the amount of the vehicle fleet that will be EV?
%23 currently. We're working with HRA, obviously in relation to their vehicle replacement programme that they're working through to identify the approach to EV, short lease, long lease in relation to EV and CAS compliant vehicles. So there's currently a piece of work looking particularly at the silver fleet in terms of with HRA, and clearly for us where there is opportunity with City Leap and other opportunities of grant potentially for us to electrify our fleet as we move forward. So that level of activity is still working through, and we haven't got an EV fleet replacement either policy or future approach agreed yet. So that's something that we're working through with colleagues with Transport, City Leap and Bristol City Leap.
Two follow-ups to that. The work that you just talked about there in terms of the policy, do you know what the timelines are for that coming forward, even if they're estimates at this stage? And then secondly, with this contract you're asking us to approve the procurement of today, will it cater for probably what is going to be increased EV cars as a percentage? I guess you'll have less maintenance issues with newer cars, so theoretically, or newer vehicles, so theoretically you should have less to spend on them. I just want to understand that a little further.
I would expect this would include that to give us that headroom, so that's positive. We've got 20% of our fleet which is CAS compliant and hybrids as well. So we've got a mixture of within the fleet. In terms of the answer to your first question, I would expect that to be concluded this financial year, because we've got the Levi funding coming through from WECA coming through. So we are reviewing our home charging position, also highways. You might be familiar with the highways across pavement charging, and obviously the Revive network as well, working closely with our WECA colleagues. So there's a number of ingredients that we do need to bring together into that policy. So I would expect that would be worked through via the relevant committee, E&S committee probably, but definitely within this financial year.
Thank you.
Are there any, oh, yeah.
Thanks. So, do these provide any income, or is it just for the delivery of services?
it's not income generation, so it's a recharge. So we would make sure we cover our costs, both from admin, management, and obviously parts. And that's, we central rates a recharge our relevant services to cover the staff in as well as the parts. But no, not income generation in terms of profit.
Would you like to explore any ways of income generating? Has that been a thought consideration?
So at the moment, we'd like to, but I think there's, in terms of relevant legal or procurement regulations that we need to adhere to in relation being obviously as a public body. But we've worked collaboratively with the university in the past, as well as with EV for replacement. Which was the vehicle company through the EV? Yeah. We received Highways England funding for testing and piloting EV vehicles, which after that pilot we're able to then retain those vehicles. So I think we can demonstrate that we have been creative where possible, but something that we'll continue to explore.
Yeah, because I think with something like fleet replacements or maintenance is something that is a general need for a lot of other service providers. So potential income generating opportunities, or rather reducing the cost because you're collaborating with others, makes it quite meaningful. And it shows that willingness to collaborate with our private and public sector organizations. I think I would have really liked to kind of see that at least you've attempted to utilizing our corporate partners or our voluntary sector organizations to explore what would good collaboration on something that is going around the city, instead of doing one job, how could it stop and do 2 pickups for one job? And I think it's worth exploring what we could do with our fleets.
Agree, and we can commit to definitely doing that. I think we can demonstrate from our own company, so Bristol Workplace, Bristol, in terms of the soft FM service delivery, as well as elements within Bristol Waste in some of their, not their large vehicles, but we do service some of their smaller vehicles and the vans in relation to Bristol Workplace.
Does anyone else have any further questions or comments? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, so I'll go to move the recommendation. So the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves the procurement of the vehicle parts and managed stores contract as outlined in this report, authorises the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Chair of Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to procure and award the vehicle parts and managed stores contract in line with the procurement routes and maximum budget envelopes outlined in this report, authorises the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration to invoke any subsequent extensions and variations specifically defined in the contracts being awarded up to the maximum budget envelope outlined in this report. I will need a seconder because I'm not sat in the benches anymore. Brilliant, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I think that was unanimous, and I'm very glad that Tony was here for the one with 14 recommendation points. Thank you very much. So agenda item 13 now, Property Transformation Programme Quarterly Update, and that's again, I think, with you, Pete.
Thanks, Chair. This is our quarterly update for July, both looking back and looking forward. The format is very similar to the previous reports that we've been bringing to committee in relation to where the current status and performance against the Property Transformation Programme. So it does focus around 2 areas of activity. One is corporate landlord in relation to the establishment of a corporate landlord and a variety of activities underneath that, as well as the approach to disposal and estate rationalisation. The report does break down in terms of costs, in terms of the breakdown of budget that has been allocated to the programme, and there are 8 strands of work which are highlighted in the report across both corporate landlord and disposals. And there is a financial table in the report which highlights the level of transformational money being assigned to each element, as well as the savings which are being required to be achieved through that investment. pleased to say that the revenue savings from last year were achieved. So there was a target of 1.2 million, and we achieved 1.6 million. So acknowledge the work of the team in terms of identifying savings that can be incurred, as well as increased income opportunities. On page 235, the report does bring out progress and highlights from April to June 25 in terms of establishing the corporate landlord and the budget centralisation work. So we've been able to identify the relevant services and budgets to be centralised across into corporate landlord programme. Pleased to say that we've been successful in awarding our ICT system for corporate landlord in May 26. So that we'll have an estimated implementation date and go live in spring of next year, which is really exciting for us to have a one view in terms of our estate, our repairs and maintenance, and that life cycle modelling, really important. We've also awarded our corporate catering and events contract that went live in July, and also awarded the Hard FM contract, which is being mobilised as we speak to start in September. So some really good progress made in relation to the strands of work. And in looking forward for July to September, we will be completing over and above the service level agreements for each service with the corporate landlord in terms of level of expectations and outputs. We'll also have the strategic asset management plans, so those assets which services are wanting to work from and operate from, and for us to understand their requirements, but also understand the financial challenges and the risks and compliance to those buildings. We're currently doing a live piece of work in relation to asset disposal and our enabling view of how we best can achieve and the target of our capital receipts target, which we know is significant, as outlined in the report, of 45 million. So we'll be bringing a paper back to committee in September in relation to our approach to both the investment and commercial opportunities, as well as an update in relation to our operational assets that we deem to be surplus, which you'll be familiar with, been bringing through previously committees. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Patrick, and then Tom.
Thank you very much for this report. I think the team needs to be commended on the overachievement of savings. Savings of 1.6 million as opposed to a target of 1.2. That's brilliant work. So well done to everyone who's been working on that, and please do pass on our compliments there. My specific question, please. I noted that 100 Temple Street is getting mentioned quite a lot in this report. I know there were previously plans to look at sort of renting it out, the whole building out, or disposing of it. I was just wondering if we could check what's happening with that, please. Obviously, it's where our emergency operations centre is, so we would like to retain that facility. And I know the NHS is currently renting some of it out as well, so I'm wondering what the general situation is there, please.
To give reassurance, there is no plans to dispose of the Temple Street in relation to services that operate from there. There are 8 floor plates, so a north wing, a south wing, and 4 floors. We, as the report refers to, income generation through the letting to NHS, which has been really successful. A new reception on the north wing, if you've been to under Temple Street recently, as well as a lot of construction work on accessibility, both from the ramp to make that compliant and accessible, as well as accessing the building from the undercroft. So some really good improvement works to the building. And also pleased that we have let the 4th floor on the north wing to Health and Safety Executive. So now all of the north wing is occupied. On the south wing, we do have a 3rd floor south, which is the largest floor plate on the south wing, that we're actively engaging with 2 companies who potentially would consider renting that space, but they're in no negotiation at the moment. So hopefully we should, as we go into the end of this year, have all those floor plates occupied, predominantly by council staff from the south side, but also partners on the north side. So really good progress. Thanks.
Thank you. That's really reassuring, and yeah, well done again to the team for getting that occupancy rate so high.
Thank you for this report. Really comprehensive. Good news on the revenue. Obviously, the capital receipt was significantly missed. I'm just going off what this report says. Says that 21.6 million was the target, 10.5 million secured. One of the big bugbears of mine, I've raised it a few times, is the changing nature of the capital receipts target because of the drop-off in the general funds capital programme that is already, as we've heard, 40-ish million of slippage, and that includes the HRA. What would be really helpful, noting that this is a programme that just because it slips doesn't mean the need to recreate the income has gone away. It just slips into future years. But it would be really helpful to understand the interplay a bit more when this report next comes back. So, right, you were told this is the capital receipt at the start of the year. We've had this slippage in the general fund programme. What impact has that now had on the capital receipts target that we need to do this financial year? Because some of that slippage will be in grant programmes. It won't have anything to do, of course, with your capital target receipt, but it'd be really helpful just to really understand in much clearer detail the interplay between those two things going forward.
Definitely. It's a real challenge for us in relation to working close, but we're working closely with corporate finance colleagues to understand that level of borrowing, as you say, the delivery of the capital programme or the delay of certain programmes, and we touched on that earlier in committee. But definitely we can bring that to life for the next quarterly update. We've got an internal meeting later this week, which we are bringing to life where we currently are in relation to that approach to the headroom, if it exists, and how that does look in relation to the target and what we're going after. Because obviously it's important for us to have that intelligent view of what we are wanting to deem surplus and potentially to dispose to ensure that we do meet the right target. But within that 45 million, there's funding for transformation, circa 23 million, as well as then the contribution towards the capital programme. And one of the questions of what we're actively proposing, and you'd expect us to do this monthly, is understanding the need of capital or flex capital for the delivery of the transformation programme, and making sure that we accurately forecast on that, as well as obviously the capital delivery. But we can bring that mechanism next time, as well as in terms of where we are at the end of the next quarter.
Just briefly, thank you. That's helpful. Getting to a more sort of almost real-time position would be really useful. And I think the other thing about transformation, it's quite clear in what you produce for the property transformation programme, the specific projects, how they're delivering, and we can see that transforming happening, not happened, both tenses. What I think we have increasing concerns about, some of us, is that transforming also happening on those other transformation programmes, because what we don't want to end up in a situation is that we're plugging all this money into flexible use of capital receipts by selling off buildings, and then the programmes in children's and in adults, for example, don't then deliver on their stated outcomes and come back for a request for even more money because things like children's homes aren't being used in a quick enough time after they become available. The property in Bishop Manor Road, which is a constant one I continue to flag, empty, declared its surplus in June 23, still empty, going off to adult social care. So clearly there's some, I think, almost bringing together the transformation programmes and how we keep in that high level overview so that we don't have to sell off more assets to do more transforming that then doesn't happen. Hopefully the point makes sense.
Completely agree. I think the creation of a corporate transformation board which brings those together as on a monthly cycle that started last month, that was really useful. The asset management plans are really important for us to really understand the needs of those services which historically haven't necessarily been in one place. So that's really, really helpful. And to ensure also from corporate landlord is to understand their locality and neighbourhood requirement stroke model. It's really important for us as corporate landlord to work with our colleagues, particularly in adults and children who are that front facing, to understand where they're working from or where they might want to work from, to enable us to then tailor what that offer is in terms of the asset and where do we put our investment, thinking from an R&M side. And also I'd extend that one step further. Only last week, Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership approached us with an opportunity that they've got financially to potentially identify a locality solution for them through our assets that they'd identified through a surplus process. So some really good progression there, and I think we've come a long way from where we were in 22. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Sibs, did you have a question?
Yes, Chair, thank you. And I really like that, and I think it's a process we have to rely on because of how it gives or provides rather hyperlocal data, and that hyperlocal data makes all of our decisions relevant to the communities that reside within that specific asset. But looking at the reports, there's a consistent kind of thread around accurate property data in order to really get the corporate landlord model sufficiently working. So I don't see it as chicken and egg. I think we really have to get the data first so that the corporate model can make effective decisions. Where are we with that corporate data element of really understanding the assets, really understanding the geographies, so that when it comes to the decision making, you've got a data-led approach, and then we can work out the logic and the budget elements afterwards. Because like what Tom is saying, it sounds like the logic was there, the opportunity was there, the data wasn't, and therefore the decision hasn't been made. So I'm really interested in having a data-led first approach, but maybe not having, so when is the data part coming? Secondly, have you found a hindrance in not having the data that you end up being more, not making decisions because it's just...
Yeah, I think there's agree, and agree. I think that the data is there. The issue is the data might be on file paper, or it may be there through an assessment that's on a system that isn't linked to another system. So the Concerto system that we've awarded now, the work that we're doing now to mobilise is to ensure that the variety of data systems online, as well as that of the information that is on paper, is actually put into one place. There isn't too much in paper because we've gone paperless. But if in terms of lease arrangements, for example, we've got over 500 operational assets, over 800 commercial assets. There's lots of information in lots of different parts. Yeah. I think from an R&M perspective, in relation to the Hard FM contract, having the contract where we can reset and we can gatekeep in relation to not only data but money in relation to that control centrally. Mm-hmm. We will have a front door for corporate landlord, whereas up until this last 6 months, when we had a lot of spend off contract that other council departments were allowed to do because of the way that the contract was established. Yeah. To be able to control that spend in one space and to be more intelligent with what we do, really important. I think in terms of the work David and the team have done in relation to the requirements of that contract and the assessments of our assets will then enable us to be more intelligent around what we do and when we do it. David, I don't know if you want to bring to life anything on the asset.
Yeah, I can do. I mean, in terms of systems that we're using, obviously we're implementing Concerto is the system that we'll be using. We've awarded the contract there. So that's going to be pulling lots of things together. Like Reed said, it would be fully implemented no later than May 26, but hopefully we can bring that forward. But through the Hard FM contract, we're implementing SFG20 as a standard as well, which looks at a really detailed asset verification process. So what we'll look to do is all the assets within our buildings, we'll be able to look at the through-life costing of each of the components of the building, so whether that's a boiler or a pump. So what that will do is inform our capital spend programme. So I should be able to tell you in 7 years' time, the capital spend at City Hill should be X, and that will allow us to plan more effectively. So with SFG20, there's a digital portal, and the fact that we're using an NEC for FMC contract means that we're also putting a digital portal in with there to enable the control. So all of a sudden, we've got lots of solutions to bring all the data together to make informed decisions. Concerto would be that one-stop shop for us with all our relevant information that we can pull out reports which can inform decision-making. So I think the next 6 months will be really revolutionary for how we manage property across the organisation.
Yeah, and I say this also because where you have community asset transfers, it's really important that we understand the assets that are being transferred, so that when we have opportunities through CT Leap, for example, we're able to kind of support those organizations with the assets that's being transferred to them in a smart way. And even with our schools, strategic sale, Section 106, a sale from the community element part of it, we can work much more collaboratively by really knowing what is the gap, what is the opportunity, who can match fund certain things versus just passing on assets, especially I'm talking about community assets. passing on those assets without really having a full awareness of how we can really support those organizations. So this kind of program that really is great, but without that data, I think we'll still be in a position where we're making decisions without full clarity. So I'm looking forward to when you've got the data. I'm sure you are too.
Any other questions or comments on this? Nope, excellent. So this is this report is just for noting. So is everyone on the committee happy to note this report and move on? Excellent. So agenda item 14, which is on surplus asset disposals. So there are two separate reports under this item. So we'll deal with the first one first, and then we'll move on to the next one. The report seeks approval for the sale of 146 Grosvenor Road in St Paul's. Oh. Yeah, sorry. I was about to say there is an exempt part of this report. So if we have any questions that specifically relate to the exempt part, which is Appendix E, then we move into exempt session. But the decision obviously will be taken back in here. That's correct. Yes. So I'll just ask, do people have questions that relate to the exempt part of the report, which is Appendix E? Shall we move into exempt session? Okay, so I move that under Section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the next item of business on the ground that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Okay. And does everyone agree to move into exempt session? Okay, brilliant. Okay, 1P08, please. So just to note, for the benefit of anyone watching on the webcast, we obviously, this item had 2 reports in it, and we covered the exempt sessions for both items just now. So we are moving on to a decision, back into public session. So for first one then, moving the decision so that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves the sale on the open market of 146 Grosvenor Road, St Paul's, BS2 8YA, and to authorise the Executive Director of Growth and Regen, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to dispose of the asset, including entering into necessary legal agreements as set out in the report. Do I have a seconder? Okay, that's Patrick. And all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, all those against? And any abstentions? No, okay, that one passes. So next one, is that all okay? So next is the, just find my, is the disposal of 107 to 141 St George's Road and Jacobs Wells Road. And let me just find my thing. So that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves the report and recommendation and authorises the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Director of Finance and the Committee Chair to approve the marketing and subsequent sale of the Council's freehold interests in all the buildings and land comprised in 107 to 141 St George's Road and 2 to 16 Jacobs Wells Road at market value in accordance with Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, England and Wales, less normal cost of sale. Phew, that was a paragraph. Do I have a seconder? Brilliant. And all those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. And any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Both of those have passed. That concludes the meeting. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for staying a little bit longer as the overrun. Apologies to anyone who had other places to be, but everyone free to go. Thank you. That's